Hey folks, Jimmy Smith back. First off, people wondering about my tooth and my lip. Everything's jujitsu. You see me with a black eye, you see me with some problem, everything is jujitsu. I don't train striking anymore because I don't have to. Occasionally I'll teach, but I don't, I'm not sparring anymore these days. So white belt, his knee went right through my mouth. Just doing something normal, as anyone who does jujitsu knows, always a white belts that hurt you. And he just was super spazzy, and his knee went through my lip and my tooth, and so I have braces for now 5 weeks. So that's what happened, doing jiu-jitsu. It's my life. Anyway, so my video about BJ Penn, which has done phenomenally well, it's always surprising to me what does well and what doesn't, but it got me thinking, because BJ Penn, probably the most talented, gifted fighter of all time, period. It got me thinking about my all-time greatest not gifted fighters. Now, that's not an insult. That is a compliment. The years I've spent in combat sports, which is now like 25 years, almost always a champion in a major promotion, UFC, Pride, something like that, even Strikeforce, you saw something in that fighter early on in their career that made you go, yeah, they have it. Whatever it is, they have it. They're extremely talented, whatever it is. They have something that separates them from the pack. And every now and then, there's a champion or an elite fighter who sneaks up on me, where I saw them, in my career, I've seen everybody from the beginning pretty much. And these are fighters who either didn't have any specific talent or didn't display that it factor. They were the hardworking blue-collar fighters who got all the way to the top. It's extremely rare, but it does happen. And I got to give credit to those fighters because they don't have the gifts everybody else has. They are just more determined and work harder in the gym and make up for it in other ways. So when I say a fighter's not gifted, what I mean is they work harder than everyone else. They're the blue-collar fighter who shows up to work every day and somehow manages to get ahead of the pack. So, that being said, here's my list of greatest ungifted fighters of all time, meaning the blue-collar, hardworking guys. In no particular order, Frankie Edgar, big standout to me. Now, I ran into Frankie when I was calling PFL in Cape Town. He was cornering somebody. And every time I see Frankie, he's incredibly nice, likes me a lot. So, I love seeing him, and we catch up a little bit and when we're able to talk. And I'm always stunned at how small he is. Every time I see him, and I've seen him a million times. Nowadays, I fought at 170 pounds. I am a 55er these days, and I tower over Frankie Edgar, who was UFC champion at 155 pounds. He is just a really small guy, and every time I see him, I go, I just can't believe he was champion and defended his title at 155 pounds and beat, one of the most talented fighters of all time in BJ Penn, and beat him in a rematch, and beat him in another rematch. So the idea that he was champ, every time I meet him, I'm just stunned, because I meet a lot of 55ers who are bigger than me by a lot, and Frankie is not one of them. So on the way up, this is a guy, I saw him beat Sean Sherk. I saw him beat Hermes Franca. I saw him beat Spencer Fisher. The only one that made me go, he might be someone special. Spencer Fisher was really good at the time. And he was a guy that we thought would be a contender. And Frankie dominated him. But it's going to be a theme in this list. He dominated him in a way that wasn't particularly flashy. Outworked him. Out-wrestled him, took him down, right? Put physical pressure on him the whole time. And outworked Spencer Fisher, put him on his butt where he became kind of an average fighter. And, wore him out. He won by decision all the time coming up. And one of the things that separates kind of the elite from a regular fighter is on the way up, they're blowing everybody out of the water. They really don't run into trouble until they get to the elite level, the contender level. Frankie was winning by decision on the way up against guys who, we don't necessarily remember today in MMA, went the distance with Frankie Edgar. Sean Sherk, former champion at 55, outworked him, but Sean Sherk was kind of at the end of his run. So there weren't these like fireworks when I saw Frankie Edgar fight that made me think he'd be something special. Huge upset when he beat BJ Penn. Huge. It's one of those upsets that doesn't get the credit it deserves because BJ went on such a slide later in his career. No one thought he had a prayer, myself included, against BJ Penn. Nobody did. And he went out there and outworked him. It was a controversial decision at the time, still is a bit controversial, but he still beat BJ, no doubt, in the rematch. And when you look at him, yeah, he wrestled at Clarion, which is a D1 school in Pennsylvania, but he qualified for the NCAA tournament. I don't think he won a match at the NCAA tournament. If he did, he won one. So he's one of those guys who, yeah, he wrestled D1, was not a standout, not an All-American, not anything special, didn't go to the Olympics, and yet was able to translate that into MMA. I can go to any D1 school, right? A big one, Penn State, Ohio State, Iowa, throw a stick and hit a better wrestler than Frankie Edgar. And yet he translated that into victories at 55. Now, 45 and 55, which were the divisions in which he spent most of his career, yes, he finished at 35, don't have a lot of great wrestlers in them. The credentials Frankie Edgar had and turned into success at 55 and 45 don't work at 170, where it's just full of All-Americans and national champions and Olympians. You're just not going to out-wrestle those guys. Off the top of my head, you got GSP, probably greatest MMA wrestler of all time, Matt Hughes, Johnny Hendricks, Josh Koscheck, right? Tyron Woodley, guys with multiple All-Americans, national titles, stuff like that. But Frankie was at 55 where he could translate that into a championship run. But hardworking guy, known for his gas tank, got to make the list. Michael Bisping at 185 pounds. When he got his title shot last minute against Luke Rockhold, he was 6-4 in his last 10 fights. And when I was coaching MMA, which I don't really do much anymore, when I was coaching MMA back in the day, I would show them tapes of Michael Bisping and go, that's how good you can be with hard work. And what I meant by that was he had a really good gas tank because he was just always in shape. His fundamentals were good. Hands up, chin down, good movement, good combinations. Not flashy with anything. Once again, to make this list, he wasn't blazingly fast. He wasn't a particularly powerful striker necessarily. He didn't do anything where you went, oh, you can't do that because you're not a great athlete. He was just fundamentally really sound, outworked guys, and was very, very mentally tough. That's it. Got him all the way to the title. Now, without a last-minute opportunity against Luke Rockhold, he probably doesn't get a title shot. The streak leading into the Luke Rockhold fight was a shot Anderson Silva, Talis Latis, CB Dollaway. Yes, he had won 3 in a row, but that list generally wouldn't get you a title shot. Could he have strung together enough if he hadn't fought Luke Rockhold? Maybe he gets one more. Maybe. But so much of getting a title shot is where you are right at that moment and when they need somebody. The stars aligned. He got a title shot and won one of the biggest upsets in UFC history against a guy who had housed him before. Another thing about Michael Bisping is when he had lost to upper echelon guys, right? Dan Henderson, one of the worst knockouts I've ever seen when he got knocked out by Dan Henderson. I heard stories about how messed up Bisping was after that fight. Vitor Belfort blew him out of the water. Yes, PEDs all over the place, but my point is he hadn't just lost. There are cases that Luke Rockhold crushed him with a guillotine, right? Just outclassed him. When he would bump up against those guys, right, at the elite level, you would see the difference. And there's a picture I have, and I'll post in this video if I can find it, of me, Bisping, and Michael Chiesa. We're all working the Fox desk. And it was before we were in the green room or whatever. Bisping's about my size. And as I said, I'm not a big 170 at all. I'm not even a big 55er. Michael Chiesa is bigger than both of us. And I was looking at Mike like, dude, you're a world champion at 85? The dude just outworked people. He just did it. Now, did he have a long run? No. He beat Dan Henderson in obviously a controversial fight at the time. Lost to GSP. He didn't have like a tremendous run at 85, but the fact that he got all the way there with his size, not a big 85er, lack of real finishing power. So he had to go the distance a lot, or at least late in fights. He wasn't a bad finisher. He had good finishing instincts. He didn't have the kind of power he was getting guys out of there in the first round, so he had to fight long, difficult fights a lot. He had to outwork a lot of fighters. And that's what partly led to the physical problems he had. Obviously, everybody knows he lost an eye and all that stuff, but he's got shoulder problems and all kinds of issues because he was a grinding striker, which means you're going the distance a lot or going late in fights a lot, and you're striking the whole time. Frankie Edgar won a lot of decisions, but he was out wrestling guys, so he wasn't taking a lot of damage while he was doing it. Michael Bisping was. So he deserves a ton of credit for how far he got with his talent level. And hats off to him 100%. I'm glad he's doing movies and stuff and still doing commentary. Rich Ace Franklin. Rich Franklin, I kind of feel bad for in a sense, in that there are certain fighters, if you're a boxing fan like me, Wilfred Benitez, Sonny Liston, who get forgotten because they were really good fighters, even great, but they were right before an all-time great. Wilfred Benitez, if you don't remember, lost to Sugar Ray Leonard. And so we all remember Sugar Ray Leonard. We forget Benitez was a champion at 17 years old. He was a world champion. Unbelievable. But we all think of Sugar Ray Leonard. Sonny Liston, of course, famously losing twice to Muhammad Ali. And you forget how feared and how good, great even, Sonny Liston was, because the guy who beat him ended up being a GOAT. Well, Rich Franklin, at 185, lost his title to Anderson Silva twice in devastating fashion. And that's what we tend to remember. You forget how great he was before then, and even afterward, it had well, he had to bounce around a lot, which kind of sucks. But, and what I mean by that is, I remember he fought Forrest Griffin at 205. He fought some guys that he fought some very tough guys after that, and win some, lose some, was still in it. Rich Franklin's workouts. I remember back when the UFC did a lot more documentaries and behind the scenes stuff, he did a thing where he went through his whole workout, and it was, you got tired looking at it. And he was asked, don't you worry about, giving away your secrets? And he goes, nobody can do what I'm doing. You can try, but you're not going to get through my workout, even if you know what it is. He wasn't worried about it at all. He outworked everybody, and he had some devastating wins. His win over Nate the Rock Quarry, one of the scariest knockouts I've ever seen in my life. He was beating the crap out of Nate, which sucks. It was kind of a longer beating. And then he hit him. Nate went stiff and just went out. So it was like halfway through round one, but he was getting beat up for 2.5 solid minutes, and then bang, and then fell over. It was bad. David Loazo, very good fighter, and he just beat the crap out of him for 5 rounds, destroyed Evan Tanner the 2 times they fought. One was at 205, one was at 185. But, really good fighters for that era, and he beat the crap out of him. He was a big 85er. He, once again, it was the work ethic, right? His striking was solid. His ground game was solid. His takedown was solid. But it was more that he just had heart and he had gas, and you just couldn't keep up with the guy. But losing to Anderson Silva twice, that's what we tend to remember is, man, the greatness of the all-time guy. But there was a stretch in there after that. He beat Jason McDonald, beat Yushin Okami, Travis Lutter, Matt Hamill. And remember, Matt Hamill was a 205er. The idea that he was still the number 2 guy at 85. So the start of Anderson Silva's run, he was arguably the number 2 guy, and just lost to him twice. He wasn't going to get another shot. So what happens? He gets fed to a lot of really tough guys and guys on the way up, and it was win some, lose some until the end of his career. But lost to Dan Henderson, Vitor Belfort, Forrest Griffin, that once again at 205, and Kung Lee. Beat Chuck Liddell, Vanderlei Silva twice. Matt Hamill, as I said, Travis Lutter. So very, very tough guy who went so incredibly far, considering he didn't have one-shot knockout power or blazing speed or any of the things that, the timing of Anderson Silva, he didn't have that, and really went far at 185 pounds. He really deserves his flowers. This is an interesting one. Randy Couture. Because of all of the guys on this list, Randy's the only one I actively trained with back in the day when I was with Team Punishment in the early 2000s. Randy used to come by all the time and train, and that's something people forget is Team Punishment back then when Tito Ortiz was running it. Everybody went through there. Chuck Liddell, Dan Henderson, Randy Couture. People that he fought later. Matt Lindland, Jason Miller. Everybody went through there. And so I got to train with a lot of different guys. And I remember training with Randy. And one of the things about Randy is he was just stocky. He was, a heavy dude, fighting at heavyweight at the time. But he had no particular physical attributes that set him apart from anyone else. And when you look at his early fights, and the reason he's kind of an anomaly on this list, he's a pioneer. He's from like the old school days. And he's the only one to kind of make the transition successfully from the old school days to now. And this guy who made his debut in 1997. And of course, you're going to say, well, he had great wrestling. But he wrestled for 30 years. It wasn't like he was particularly gifted at wrestling. Yes, he made a national title. That's awesome. But the idea that he relied on some kind of physical ability, he relied on his experience. He relied on his work ethic. He relied on he made 2 finals, by the way, in the NCAAs. But, the idea that he took his wrestling and used it at a time where wrestling was all you needed. He added other skills, and I think that was kind of what made him different from like the Mark Kerrs and the Mark Colemans of the world, is the rest of his game kind of caught up because he kept working at it in a way that standout wrestlers back then, the late 90s, early 2000s, didn't. They just, hey, I can out-wrestle everybody, that's what I'm going to do, and that's it. Well, Randy added tools to his toolkit. Now, none of them were extraordinary. He was never a lights-out striker. He was never an amazing submission specialist. He was never any of these things. But he built all of that on his base, slowly but surely, and became an all-time great and had incredible longevity in the sport. But I remember them showing us moves. I was with him doing whatever, his regular jiu-jitsu, and he didn't pick up anything faster than anyone else. There were certain guys who were really gifted, and you'd show them a move and they'd get it, and that was it. Randy wasn't one of those guys. He didn't pick it up faster than anybody else. He did it over and over and over until he got good at it, and that's it. And when you watch him through his run at 205, when I think he was really at his best, although he did have some good runs at heavyweight, tight striking, he was able to find the weaknesses in whomever he was fighting. Because he was so well-rounded, he could kind of find the cracks in the armor in a way that other people couldn't. I remember him outstriking Chuck Liddell in their first fight because he said, Chuck likes to kind of set his feet and throw. Well, as soon as he set his feet, Randy would hit him, which is really an IQ thing. It wasn't that he was any faster. He certainly didn't have the striking power of Chuck Liddell, but he could time him well because he had really high fight IQ. But especially the heavyweight, when we talk about physically gifted, he was fighting guys way bigger than him, way more explosive, way more athletic. When he beat Tito was right in his prime. I know that was at 205, and I think Randy was 40. Randy just out-wrestling him, put him on his butt, grinding, and just wore Tito out in a way that no one else had. Tito, much more physically gifted than Randy, but Randy found a way to win. And once again, to just keep your relevance from 97 to his final fight. I'm looking up the year because I remember it was Lipton Cheeto 2011. All right. So to stay relevant that long is absolutely absurd. And in other sports terms, it's almost like staying relevant from the 70s to now in football, where the game has changed so dramatically. It was a shorter amount of time, but Randy stayed relevant when the game had changed so dramatically, and he did it without a ton of physical gifts. But also, I think that gave him longevity. Remember, he didn't start till he was 33. But if you're not relying on any kind of explosive gifts, those go away as you get older. If you're just relying on your IQ and your fundamentals, you can have that longer career because, yeah, you naturally slow down, but Randy was never really that fast. Yeah, you can't take a punch like you used to, but Randy was never a guy who, went out there and got in these huge wars where he relied on his chin. He had a good chin, but he generally didn't like get in wars where, all of a sudden his chin went out and he couldn't fight anymore. So, but Randy, definitely a champion who deserves a lot of mention on this list. Last, certainly not least, Stipe Miocic. And Stipe is the only one on this list who you could argue is the greatest in his weight class all time. I still put Fedor number 1. I put Stipe number 2. He's the only one on this list who you could argue is number 1 all time in his weight class. And when I first saw him fight in the UFC, I didn't think. I remember he fought Shane Del Rosario, a guy that I knew from my M1 days. You thought, okay, he's a big heavyweight, not gigantic. There are bigger guys out there. He's a solid wrestler. Once again, not an All-American, not a national champion, didn't go to the Olympics. So he wrestled D1, but not a standout D1 guy. His striking was good. It wasn't great. And he just kept chopping away at the division, piling up wins against guys who had all of those gifts. And on his way up, I remember thinking, okay, he's a serviceable heavyweight. He might get into that contender discussion. Sure, might get a title shot if he's hot at the right time, but I didn't see any reason why he would be champion, let alone #1 heavyweight of all time. And he did it, man. He lost after the Shane Del Rosario win, lost to Stefan Struve. Roy Nelson, Gabriel Gonzaga, Fabio Maldonado, lost to Junior Dos Santos. Then Mark Hunt. This is the run, obviously, that everyone remembers. Mark Hunt, Andrei Arlovski, Fabricio Verdum, Alistair Overeem, Junior Dos Santos in a rematch, and Francis Ngannou. That is an incredible run of guys who were infinitely more gifted. Overeem is one of the most gifted fighters I've ever seen. He does have the whole like BJ Penn, so gifted he's lazy. He does kind of have that a little bit, but incredibly gifted. Francis Ngannou physically has every gift that that Stipe Miocic doesn't have. He's huge, naturally super heavy-handed, all this stuff. And in the first fight, Stipe was able to use his wrestling and his fight IQ to beat him. So when I look at all of these fighters, and won the title against Fabricio Verdum, a world champion in jiu-jitsu. Incredibly gifted. He beat Arlovski. I think is naturally a lot faster, has better boxing. And all the gifts that he didn't have, that run of guys had all of them, and he beat them. That says a lot. That says a lot to me. I think by the time, obviously, he beat, DC in the trilogy, and I think that solidified, okay. I knew everything after that. I didn't think he would be champion a lot long. He was just getting old, and he had been through some wars, and Father Time caught up with him. But I think in his prime, the run he had that I just mentioned, I'll put that run against anybody. Fedor, I think, had a better run in Pride back in the day. But the idea that he became arguably #1 in his weight class, despite not having any gifts at all, even his size, and some people in comments say, oh, he's a big heavyweight. Not compared to other heavyweights, wasn't big. Not compared to Francis Ngannou, he wasn't big. So, yes, and that's a universal here, by the way. When I talk about these guys, you go, oh, he had this, oh, he had that. You think, did he have it compared to the rest of the division? No, that's why they're on this list. Stipe was a decent-sized heavyweight. He wasn't big by heavyweight standards. Now, he wasn't as small as Randy Couture, who was small by heavyweight standards, but he also wasn't a giant. And Stipe, once again, gas tank, work ethic, mental strength. That is the unifier here. All of these guys that I just went over, mentally extremely strong. They believed they were going to win despite the fact that they weren't as gifted, as fast, as strong, as big as their opponents. All these guys very, very mentally strong, and maybe that's their gift. These are all champions, by the way, in the UFC. If there's a champ I missed, please let me know. Or if there's a non-champ you want to put on the list, put it on there. Let me know in the comments section. Talk to you soon.